Hey there guys, Adam here with another EDH Geeks video. So, if you didn't know, by clicking the video and seeing what this video was about, we're having a bit of another old man rant, I guess, about the fetch lands. This is one of the biggest issues that always comes up, along with a couple of other things in Magic the Gathering. The price of these cards. Now, they're not obviously as expensive as some cards like the original duels, which I already have a video on, which will be going up sometime soon. But these cards are absolute staples for every single Eternal format. Now, Eternal formats to me are Commander, Modern, and Vintage Legacy. Those are the Eternal formats. They'll never really change what they are. Sure, there'll be new decks and metagames in those formats, but basically, more or less, those formats will remain, fetch land into shock land or fetch land into an original dual land. So that's what those formats are made to do. Those are meant to be the most powerful, effective, streamlined decks for modern and for legacy vintage, absolutely. And certainly when you start talking CEDH, they certainly are much more onto that pathway of thinking where you've really got to have a tuned mana base. And look, I run fetches in my EDH decks. Not everyone does, and not everyone can. And that is to do with price. Now, I know there's a lot of YouTubers and others out there that talk about these issues, and they do a really much better job than somewhat what I would do in certain areas. But I still think that having this conversation out there, despite being like a little bit clickbaity or whatever, is good because it gets the conversation going. And that's what we need. We need this whole conversation. And yes, next year in Modern Horizons 2, the fetch lands are going, or half of the cycle of fetch lands, the most expensive half of the cycle of fetch lands, is going to be reprinted. We know this. But is that going to be enough? And what's it for? Now, I think the problem that we keep facing is, where are these cards going to go? Because Modern, Vintage, and Legacy, those formats, despite me saying they're Eternal formats, they're just being played much less and less and less. Especially the older formats of Vintage and Legacy. They're even less than Modern is. And Modern has dropped off significantly with the advent of Pioneer, and other things have led to it just being less played and less played because of what Modern, Vintage and Legacy, it's become much more like Vintage and Legacy, where it's just broken and mostly over by turn 2 or 3, maybe 4, unless you're really facing a, strong control deck. The gameplay is very efficient, and you cannot really make one mistake, and you cannot really miss one land drop in those sorts of formats, otherwise you're just out of the game, indefinitely. You cannot have a tapped land enter into the game because that will put you too far behind most of the time. So it's just one of those features of those formats. Those formats need these cards. And one of the biggest reasons why, again, is that these cards are too expensive for players to purchase them, and therefore the attendance starts to dwindle, and because these cards are in somewhat short supply, at least somewhat artificially, because they haven't had enough prints in the last few years, they probably should have been in many more master sets than what they were. And again, I think that sometimes the focus of reprints for certain things needs to shift, because Commander is the biggest and most popular and the most growing format of Magic the Gathering, and it has been for the last couple of years, really. And it's only going to get bigger and bigger, and there's certainly a lot of people that want to play on the more optimized to CEDH levels as well. And there's just people who want to make sure, if they're in a 3 or 4 color deck, that they can hit their colors, and not have to sit there and go, oh, I only have blue. Cool. Pass, because everything in my hand is green, or everything in my hand is white, or whatever, and all I have is blue mana. So the importance of these lands is the fixing, is the flexibility of these cards. The fetch lands are going to forever, dominate and define what Magic is into the future. I know that I've read and heard of many in the, Wizards of the Coast being like, we should have never printed these cards in the first place because they were just too efficient and too powerful, and they just became a huge problem. So these are problematic cards that they don't really want in the Magic the Gathering environment to a degree. They don't want them. They don't want them in Standard because they don't like the whole shuffling thing. I think Cultivates and Rampant Growths and whatever else, and Uros and things like this, all the ramp that's actually in Standard is much, and like Fabled Passage and things like this, is much more ramp, much more shuffling than what would really happen, if fetch lands were in Standard. But I understand their perspective, or their stance to say, okay, we're just not going to put them into Standard. And I understand them not putting them into Pioneer. If they say, okay, we're not going to have them in, that's it. Okay, cool. I don't care. I'm not playing those formats, and it's not for me. But for those people that want to play those formats, it makes it a different environment than what Modern is, and it makes it cheaper and easier in a sense to get into, because you do not have these cards that are $40 to $50 each to start playing your deck, or just being able to play your deck. You are looking at some of the cards now, because I think of back a year or so ago, before Pioneer was a thing, a lot of cards that are in that era were basically draft chaff, under 25 cents, basically nothing. Now that Pioneer is a thing, these cards are commanding a much, much higher price, especially with cards that but overlap with Modern and more older Eternal formats, staples, more or less. So like Fatal Push, Thoughtseize, things like this. So the fetch lands, what can we do about them? How can we go about this? Is there a plan that Wizards has? And how can we get them into more players' hands so that more players can play the game? Because that's where I come from this. is I want more people to be able to play the game the way that they want. Now, it might not be the way that I would want to play the game, but if somebody else wants to play the game this way, then that's up to them. If you want to play modern one-on-one with the, with all the chips on the line and whatever else, and you've got to kill your opponent and all that competitive stuff, which I'm not very interested in, or CEDH, or even just a more optimized level of Commander, which is basically where I want to be. I just want to be able to cast all my spells in my 2 to 3 color to 4 color decks. How can we get these cards into players' hands? Is Modern Horizons going to do enough for the Fetch Land reprint to drop the price to get enough supply out there? It also depends, I know a lot of people have said, on how much per box or per pack Modern Horizons 2 is going to be, because that will impact it. Because Modern Horizons is a quote-unquote premium set, or a premium pack, a master's level set, basically. So these cards, or these packs, will be priced at that price point, roughly speaking. So, but there is a difference that I have come across, which is that we keep forgetting this print of Modern Horizons is more print to demand. So they're going to continue to print this to demand. If we, as a community of players, buy enough of these boosters, buy enough of these packs, buy enough of this product when it's available, when it's coming out, and it is a fairly reasonable price, and there are some other good cards coming into the older formats, and it seems like it's worth it just based on, fetch lands alone, then, or for the average of what you would get, the number of fetch lands in a box, or perhaps there will even be box toppers as well, hopefully, but because that will increase the amount that are out there. Now, I wouldn't mind if there was, just normal box toppers. No, it'd have to be alternate art, or they could be just borderless or whatever. It doesn't matter. I think that, those premium versions can exist. It's fine. If you want to buy your expeditions, you should be expecting to pay, quite a lot more for those cards. I think that's fine for cards to, like, special edition versions to cost more than a regular version. That's fine. I think these cards should hold a certain value as well, but they shouldn't be such a barrier for so many people to be allowed to play the game in the way in which they wish to play the game. That is it. We've got to make this decision, and I sort of made this argument before, that we've got to decide whether this is a game, which it is, that we can actually play, or whether this is a let's look at pretty cards that we can never afford, or we can basically never afford, or we can basically never get new people into these older formats because the prices on these cards just is too much of a barrier to entry for them to play legitimate decks, or to play on the same power level as somebody who's been playing for a number of years and already has all the cards that they need. And again, it becomes like, well, do we have to wait for all these people to die, or to, perhaps decide that they've had enough of the format or get sick of it because there's only 2 or 3 people ever showing up to the Legacy event, or, 4 or 5 showing up to the Modern event? What do we have to do to get to the point where we can get more players into these formats? Like, I care more about Commander than anything else, and I wouldn't really normally care, and I wouldn't normally care about these other formats, but if they are part of the Magic Gathering community and you think of it as a whole organism in a way, it takes all sorts. I think, again, there should be all areas of play open to everyone. If you want to play the most busted EDH deck, go for it. You should be allowed to go and build those decks if you want to. But there should also be a place for the new player, for the casual player to get into the game. And there should be every single step along the way up to that point. And players should have access to the basic elements and cards of the game that they need to actually play the game, like lands, ramp, card draw, those things. If your deck is a very specific synergy deck, or, what have you, if your deck revolves around something that is one of the top tier decks, then you might have to expect to play a little bit more for some of those not staple cards, but some of those more staple-ish cards of those other decks, or, what have you. But I still think that the basic parts of the game should be fairly cheap and inexpensive so that new players can get their hands fairly easily on them and be able to access these other formats. Now, again, as I said, you can still have these alt arts and different things, and you can still have your premium versions, your foils and extended borders and other things for players who want the bling bling, the most expensive stuff and the expeditions and whatnot, or your secret lairs or whatever. I want a secret lair with Batman on it or whatever, and suddenly the Batman one is, couple $100 because everyone wants the Batman one or whatever. I don't really think that'll happen to a degree, but it might. You never know. The Godzilla ones. There's so many people that want the Godzilla ones, but there's so many other people that could care less. So there should be that availability of those specific cards to say, okay, now I've got all my lands are Godzilla lands, and my deck is a Godzilla deck. Rah, I'm going to stomp my opponents with my Godzilla deck. And it's all themed and nice and foiled or whatever, or at least, in that alternate art style. So that's what people want. They want more customized things for their specific collection, I think, more and more. Not just like generically, this is a basic card. People still want those and need those, but people don't need them in the way that they need perhaps a Batman secret lair or whatever. People who are looking for a very specific thing should look for those very specific things, and the basic versions of basic cards should be fairly cheap and inexpensive for people to get. I think I've driven that point into the ground, but that's how I see it. I think that this is the way we should look at it, and hopefully I think that if this reprinting in Modern Horizons 2 is as successful and that we buy enough of it, even if it hurts us, I think it's better to a degree, because on one box or on two boxes or whatever, you're not going to care, because eventually those cards, the fetch lands especially, and whatever else they print, are going to be playable. They're going to increase in price. The metagame will change again, probably. So this is a good thing. It keeps the format alive and it keeps the format ticking along, because for so long the decks become stale. And I understand when things like Hogak and things like this become a huge problem. Those are absolutely, the right, direction to go and say, this is a problematic card, it needs to be banned, or something needs to be done about this. The environment that it has created is insane and dumb. This needs to be fixed. That is fine and should be, pushed for by the community. And it should be supported by Wizards. So that's how I see things needing to work. I can see that, a lot of people say Urza should be banned, this should be banned, but it hasn't happened yet. I know a lot of people were upset that Mox Opal got banned, but a lot of other people were happy because it dropped the price of it and they could actually buy a couple copies of it, or whatnot. But it is the way it is, and certainly there are certain decks that are really powerful, and I think Affinity, or whatever you want to call it, that deck now no longer exists, basically. So you do need to be careful with what is banned. But the thing is, where can we say what is broken eventually? Or what is acceptable in Magic the Gathering? Oh, he's playing an island! It's too broken! It has to be banned. Does it come to that point? That's a ridiculous over-exaggeration, absolutely. But does it ever come to that point where it's like, oh no, island, no, that's too powerful, planes, yeah, whatever. Planes? Oh, gotta be dreaming, mate, or whatever. Things like that, the immediate reaction to being like, oh, playing an island, no, can't, or, forest, oh no, what? Too powerful, busted, should be banned, What is a fair and balanced Magic card? That becomes a big question. But, I think I veered off topic far enough and sort of talked round myself enough to sort of get my point going and get people to understand what's going on. And look, again, there's other people out there in the community, that have done things on fetch lands and have done much better discussions than me, especially since I'm a little bit sick right now. I've got a bit of a snuffle, but no coronavirus here, so don't worry. And you can't catch it anyway. You're on the other side of a screen. But, the thing is, lastly, that this is a game. We need to look at it like it's a game. Of course, yes, it is a collectible game. So you should have collectible pieces for people who want to collect them. You want your Batman, fetch land or whatever. I don't know. You want your Expedition fetch land or whatever. You want your pretty Borderless fetch land. Whatever. Absolutely fine. Fair enough. You want a basic run-of-the-mill Arid Mesa or whatever, not Steam Vents, Sulphur Falls, is it? I think? Or whatever. Verdant Catacombs, whatever. You should be able to pick one up. You should be able to pick a playset up if you wish. You should be able to pick them up in a commander or for a commander deck or whatever you want. So you shouldn't be bound by having people say, oh, well, not having people say, but having that price point of saying, you cannot get into this area, it is too difficult, you're going to have to spend too much of your money on this hobby. And that's what it is. It is a hobby that people wish to play, and they do not wish to spend, in inexorable amounts on. So, guys, tell me what you guys think. Let me know. Please do all the things to help out the channel if you can. Like, share, subscribe, do all the good things. And if you would be so kind, go on to our Patreon. And we are getting more exclusive videos on our Patreon. And we are also doing many more things. And we're taking suggestions. And we're also taking votes from people. So if you will be on Patreon, you can get to do some of those things and decide different things and vote for different things and tell us what you think. And you can join our Discord as well and do other great things. And we'll put more content on there and take suggestions, as I said. But anyway, thanks so much for watching and hope to see you again another time.